Welcome to Communication, Connection, Community, the Podcaster's Podcast. This podcast takes a deep dive into modern-day communication strategies in the podcasting space. We chat with interesting people who make the podcasting and speaking spaces exciting and vibrant. We also dive into the podcasting community with news, updates, latest trends and topics from this ever-evolving space. So strap in. It's going to be one amazing ride. Let's dive into today's episode. If there's a goal every podcaster has, I would say it's to have some center of influence. It's to be the individual who really cuts through. I mean, there are a good number of podcasts out there, but how do you cut through all of the noise? How do you have the influence, or how do you have the effect that you want to have on your audience? Not just your audience, but on your business, on your life. Well, we're going to talk about that today in greater detail as we introduce our guest who has discovered what I would say is the secret to getting in front of the person of influence, or the person who makes the decisions. And that's really the person you want to talk to. So let's introduce our guest, EksAyn Anderson, author, influence strategist, and speaker. He's been seen on Forbes.com, Speaker Magazine, TV, and various business blogs and podcasts. His new book, The Key to the Gate, Principles and Techniques to Get Past Gatekeepers to the Decision Maker, has sold internationally. EksAyn has extensive selling experience, including selling to governments, which he's going to talk about in our conversation today, associations, and other businesses as well. Now, his educational background in psychology and life experiences has taught him not only how to connect, communicate, and sell, but also how to teach you and your team to increase your sales, negotiate with the best, and create a loyal, long-term client, probably more than one, along the way. He's also a sought-after podcast guest. We are so glad he's here today. EksAyn, or X, if we can shorten it. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks for having me on the show. What an honor to be here with you.
I am so thrilled you are here, my friend. Speaking on influence today, how did you get to where you are? Not like from the womb. Let's not go that far back, but tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you get into this place where you can talk about and be the expert when it comes to influence?
Well, it was really interesting. You know, one time I was driving home and I had this clear thought that I needed to speak to people, and I didn't know how to speak to people. In fact, I was doing real estate at the time, and I thought, this is interesting. I feel like I need to do this, but I don't know what to do. And I went down to a chapter of the National Speakers Association, and there was a lady there who'd been there for many years. And she said, well, what do you know? And I said, well, I've sold some houses. She said, well, you should go down to the real estate division and see if you can get a class approved so you can teach real estate CE. Because you need to get some paid speeches under your belt. So I said, okay. So I went down, I came up with this class, and it was an hour long, and I turned it in, and they approved it. And I thought, this is great. So I called up a few realtor associations and asked them if I could teach the class. And one of them said, yeah, we'll pay $100 to teach the class. I was thrilled.
That much?
Yeah, $100 for an hour class. It kind of went on and on where I did this class, and I realized I had more content after a while, and I cleared to a 3-hour class, and then eventually to a 6-hour class. And I got it approved in multiple states throughout the country. Eventually, a major provider of real estate continuing education bought the asynchronous rights to my class. That was down the road. But as this went on, I was talking to the same girl, and she said, you know what, if you really want to speak, if you really want to do things, you probably need to write a book. And so I decided to write a book about some experience that I've had about how to get past gatekeepers to a decision maker. And it was really lucky because there was a lady on Forbes who picked it up. And the reason she picked it up is because she said, wow, you actually got an appointment with me using the same strategies you used in your book. And I actually didn't mind the way you did it. And so she wrote this article on Forbes about how I got to her, you know, using the tactics that I wrote about in my book. So it was really kind of a fortuitous thing that allowed me to get a little TV interview, allowed me to do more speaking in different places. So I've been able to speak everywhere from Maine to California, even a little internationally now. I've been able to share some of the lessons that I've learned in real world influence, which is, you know, how do we influence others, you know, not just in sales. It could be in any venue, in podcasting, in our families and our relationships with people we love. And that's something that I've become pretty passionate about, is how do we build trust and truly influence on an interpersonal level? Great question, Carl. Thank you.
You have hit on so many nuggets there, EksAyn. So thank you so much for the dive or the view into to you and how you got here. I like how you shared that this journey through speaking and into influence, it didn't just happen overnight. It's not like you
No.
you just woke up one morning and said, "Hey, here I am, world. I've arrived." Like there was a journey, there was a process that you took to get there, and that's very important when you're looking at the journey or how do you build that trust to get to the point where you can get in front of the decision maker.
Well, and it's a great question. And back to building trust, like you said, let's take one step at a time here. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is principles. And let me tell you what I mean when I say principle. A principle is something that's bigger than me, it's bigger than you, it's bigger than all of us, and it's something that's really, really real, whether you believe it is or not. So let me give you an example. There's the scientific principle of gravity. Gravity works where I'm at, it works where you're at, works on the other side of the world. It works everywhere. I mean, in fact, it even works in space. I mean, it keeps the moon going around the Earth. It keeps the Earth going around the sun. Millions and millions of miles away, there are clusters of galaxies. They're spinning around in this cluster held together by gravity. I mean, gravity is everywhere. I mean, I didn't invent gravity. You didn't invent gravity. And so you and I have a couple of choices when we encounter a principle. And the choices are I can either align with it and respect it, or I can ignore it to my peril. Let me give you an example. Sometimes when I'm speaking to people, I'll ask people, I'll ask kind of a fun question and say, hey, how could you align with gravity to make you money? And I'll listen to the answers. Let me tell you some of the answers. You could build a ski resort. In other words, people come, I was in Vail, Colorado a while ago. In Vail, people go to Vail to ski. So they've actually, people get there, they get to the place and they take this ride up the lift. And then they have this thrilling experience being pulled down the mountain by gravity. So you could say that the people in Vail, Colorado, they make millions of dollars aligning with the principle of gravity. Let me tell you the other things I've heard. You could build a hydroelectric dam. You could do a bungee jumping company. You could do a skydiving company. Somebody once said, they raised their hand in one of my workshops and they said plastic surgery, which we won't go there. But you could probably come up with 100 different ways, a couple hundred different ways to make money with gravity. But what happens if you ignored gravity? And the answer is you could die. You could fall off a cliff. You could be injured. And so gravity's right. It's just here. Gravity's everywhere. We can either align with it and build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort and make millions of dollars, or gravity could injure us and kill us. In human relations, Carl, in life, in relationships, there are principles, I believe, that are just as real as gravity. When we're trying to influence someone, when we're trying to build trust with the podcast, when we're trying to, there are principles that are just as real, and we have a choice. We can align with them or we can ignore them to our peril. And they're bigger than us, so we don't get to choose what they are. I mean, can you imagine someone saying, sometimes when I say principles, people think I'm talking about, well, I have my principles and they work for me, and you have your principles and those work for you. Those are not the type of principles we're talking about. Those, I would call those values more.
Right.
And can you imagine someone saying, gravity might work for you, but gravity doesn't really work for me? I mean, that same person could go to the edge of the cliff and say, I believe I can fly, and jump off. And what takes over? The principle of gravity. I mean, this is the important thing. Principles control our consequences. We can choose to do whatever we want, but we do not control the consequence. Principles do. And so when you talked about trust, I'm going to lead into trust. This is a long answer. If I am not being honest with people, if I'm honest, that's a principle as real as gravity. If I'm honest, I can build trust. If I'm dishonest, I'm sorry, it's like ignoring gravity. You're going to fall off the cliff. Hard truth, that's the truth, right? I mean, and some people in sales think they can be dishonest. I'm telling you, if you want to be good in sales, you want to be good in podcasting, you want to be good at influence, you got to be able to walk your talk and build trust. So that was kind of a long answer, but one of the things that's really important is to figure out what the principles are, because if you do, you can align with them, and then you have these massive forces pushing you to success, pushing you to be more influential, pushing you to have a better podcast or a better relationship, or be able to get in front of that decision maker, rather than ignoring it and thinking, hey, why am I not getting the results I want? You got to have the principles pushing you, like a ski resort pushes the people down the hill and makes the money, rather than, hey, I'm going to fall off a cliff and die here in a second because I'm ignoring it.
I love the answer, and I'm okay if it's okay to take a breath now. There's a couple of things that I want to unbundle there. Number one is the principle of gravity. You're right. I mean, there's no denying it, and even, I mean, especially the bungee jumping company, they need to be extra sure that they're aware of gravity. They take into account How long is the bungee cord, for example? There's a lot of things at play there. But then there's also, like you've said, there's these principles, gravity being obviously the one that you mentioned there. Are there any basic principles that come to your mind, or that as you've been engaging with people or teaching them, that they really need to consider as they're getting into this influence space?
So the first one you said is really that we talked about right here. We need to walk our talk. There were some studies done that showed that in businesses, when managers walk their talk, it actually increases the profitability by 13%, where the employees perceive that the manager is actually doing what they say they're going to do. So the trust thing is really, really huge. How do we walk our talk? How do we keep our word? If we say we're going to do something, we're going to do it. But then there's a second piece. There's a layer on top of that. If we have trust, let me tell you one more thing here. I have this auto mechanic, and I know we're talking about podcasting here, but the principle is the same. Let me tell you this. I had a car many years ago. I had this problem with my car, and I took it down to a mechanic, and the mechanic told me it would cost $1,500. There was something about the interaction with him where I could sense that I felt like I wanted to get another opinion. I took the car, happened to find this guy down the street from where I was working at the time, and he took one look at my car and he said, "I can fix it for $10. 10." The other guy told me 1,500. This guy told me $10, which nobody ever tells you for a car, right? $10. Anyway, I took my car and he fixed the car. I gave him $10. My car worked great. Well, I brought it back again. This time, I had another problem with the car later down the road with the family car, and I brought it in. And this time it cost much more than that. But I ended up bringing it to this guy. And here's the thing that would happen with him. Now, before I go further, I want you to know that this guy, I found out later, has 70 5-star reviews. I know he doesn't ask for them. 5-star reviews, almost all of them are about trust. Like 46 out of 70, I looked at them, are about honesty, fairness, trust. Okay. But the next thing that was really interesting with him, and this is what he does, is he'd tell you that he'd have the car done by 5 p.m., but then he'd call you up at noon and say, "Hey, it's already done." He'd tell you, "Hey, I think it's going to be about $500. And then when you get there to pay for it, he goes, "I found a coupon. It's only $420. And so what he was always doing is he was under promising and over delivering. In life, we have what are called expectations. If reality comes in lower than what we expect, this distance between the two is called frustration. And a lot of people make people really frustrated because they set an expectation but reality comes in lower. But somehow Mike, this mechanic, he was able to set he'd make reality better than you expect. So he'd say it's going to be $500, but when you show up, it's only $420, or it's going to be done by 5, but he call you at noon, it's already done. He was able to make reality better than you expect. And then it's not frustration, it's actually delight. How can you do that as a podcaster? I mean, there might be 100 different ways. How can you make people's expectations when they listen to your podcast or when you're trying to influence them better than they expect? And that's a principle that works in sales. It works in trying to get to decision makers. We could talk about that. It works with your spouse, with your children. Like, how do we make people not frustrated with us, but delighted? And the way we do that is by managing expectations.
That's a great analogy. And I want to know what the other guy was thinking when he said $1,500. I know what he was thinking. He wanted the money, right? Or he just wasn't a very swift mechanic. What if the other, it just needed a bolt or something. But I think you're right when it comes to podcasters, because I think that the key there's many keys, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but there's some keys there. It's in the content, it's in the delivery, it's in the call to action, it's in all of those things that are in the podcast episode. And I'm assuming that when you get into, wanting to get in front of the person, how do you engage the person who is how do you get in front of the decision maker? I do want you to talk about that, because I think that this is a piece that is very relevant to podcasters, and it goes to their content, their delivery, their whatever it is. So it's very relevant in the podcasting space. So how do you, again, without giving away your best stuff, what are some of the things that people need to be aware when they're trying to get in front of the decision maker?
I got to tell you a short story before I tell you how I got in front of this, to tell you how what happened here. I was at a bank once, Carl, and I had a problem with my account. And I'll tell you, the problem with my account was that I didn't put money in the account when I should have put money in the account. Okay. Then this was many years ago. I was a little embarrassed. I went down to this bank and I said, I made this mistake. By the way, I had a bunch of overdraft fees. And this was back in the days when you had to go to the bank more than a lot of times you can do things from your phone now. But I went there, and there was a guy, we'll call him Jeff, who helped me fix this problem with my account. Well, he waived a bunch of the fees. I put the money in like I should have before. And now I went from being in the red to the black. Well, when he was done, I looked at Jeff and I said, "Hey, Jeff, can I get the email to your boss? And he looked at me kind of funny, like, why do you want the email to my boss? And I said, well, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did. And so I went home that night and I typed up an email. It took me maybe 2 minutes is all, or 3 minutes maybe. I said something like this: Dear Mr. Branch Manager, I'm writing this to Jeff's boss. Okay. I had the opportunity of speaking with Jeff. He was very professional and helpful. I think Jeff deserves a raise and a promotion. Okay. And I sent it to Jeff's boss. I copied Jeff on the email, so he knew I was doing it. And I didn't think anything else about it. I thought he did something nice for me. I'm going to do something nice for him. Well, here's the interesting thing. I went back to that same bank. And again, this is back in the days when you had, there was more people go to the bank. I was standing in line. There was probably 10 people in line. And something happened that had never happened to me before. Somebody came up to me and said, Mr. Anderson. And they knew my name, which was a little bit unusual because it was a fairly decent sized city where people don't always know each other's names. Sometimes in small towns, everybody knows each other's name. But in this situation, I was surprised. He said, Mr. Anderson. I said, yes. And he said, can I help you with your banking? And I said, well, sure. And I was kind of surprised. He took me from the back of the line. He let me do my banking in front of everybody else. You would have thought, Carl, that I had $10 million in the bank, which we all know that I didn't, right? So why did that happen? And I'll ask people to say, well, maybe Jeff did get a raise, or maybe Jeff talked about you in the break room or something. The truth is, I don't know. But I do know that I wasn't treated like a king before that. But after I wrote that letter to Jeff's boss, I got treated like a king. Well, fast forward several years, I'm sitting in New York, and this high-level director, I'm sitting across this table from a high-level director in New York, and he looks at me and he says something that completely surprised me. He said, you are the only salesperson I've ever let into my office. Now, to be fair, he might have meant about the particular product that I was selling. That's not what he said, though. He said, you're the only salesperson I've let into my office. And then he said something that was really, really interesting, Carl. And I won't tell you quite yet what he said, but
there's a cliffhanger.
No, what did I do to get into this high level director in New York? Well, I'll tell you. I'll answer my question if you want. Is that okay, Carl?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So it was almost the same thing I did at the bank. This is what happened. I called in to talk to this high level director. I actually sent him an email first, and I was completely ignored. By the way, if all you're doing is sending emails, get ready to be ignored a lot. You got to be brave enough to make a phone call and get on the phone. And I'm guessing that most podcasters on your show here, I mean, if they're brave enough to be podcasters and put themselves out there online, they probably can make a phone call. But if you're afraid of it, you might want to do that. But I called in maybe a week or so after I'd sent this email. And of course, his secretary answered the phone. I call them gatekeepers. His gatekeeper secretary answered the phone. I said, hey, can I speak with Bob? And she said, he's unavailable. By the way, that's what they always say. They're always unavailable. Okay. They're never available. Every once in a while there, but very infrequently. And I started talking to her, and I said, I'd sent an email to Bob last week. I said, do you mind if I just copy it to you to make sure he gets it? And she said, sure. And then here's the thing. I noticed, have you ever heard, Carl, have you ever heard somebody on the phone and you can almost hear them smiling? I mean, even when I talk to you, I can almost hear you smiling because you have this positive vibe about you,
Yeah.
Even though I was only on the phone, I could almost hear her cheerful, smiling disposition. As we were talking, I said, you know what? I'm on the phone all day long, and it is refreshing to talk to someone as friendly and courteous and professional as you. Thank you. And I was sincere. I mean, I meant it 100%. She said, well, thanks, in her kind of nice, smiling way, right? And I was pulling up the email, and she was still on the phone with me. I said, you know what? I'm going to mention that to your boss. And she said, thank you. So I typed really fast, and I said, dear Bob, had the opportunity of speaking with Janice. She was very professional and courteous. I think she's an asset to your team. By the way, I'm going to be in New York in these days. And I sent the email to her boss, Bob. I copied it to Janice. And I said, hey, did that email come through? There was a little pause. And she said, oh, yeah, yep, it came through. And then there was another little pause. And she said, hey, thanks for the compliment. And I said, well, I meant it. Then thanks for being so awesome. That was the end of the conversation, Carl. That was it. Anyway, I'm now fast forward. I'm back in this high level director's office. He just said, you're the only sales guy I've ever let into my office. He said, the reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary.
Wow.
He said, I talked to my secretary more than I talked to my wife. And some of these sales guys don't understand that. Here's the interesting thing. What he didn't say was, you have great social media, or you have a great website. He said, you were nice to my secretary. What's the principle that got me in there that's as real as gravity? And I'll tell you, I think it's the golden rule. Basically just treating people like you want to be treated, and expectations. Remember, we talked about that, where her reality came in a little bit better than she expects. She probably is weeding out salespeople all day long, but by the end of the phone call, she actually had an email in her mailbox complimenting her to her boss that was sincere. So her reality was a little bit better than she expected, and she was more delighted instead of frustrated. If you can find ways when you're trying to influence people to make their reality a little bit better than they expect, and make sure it aligns with that timeless ancient principle that's as real as gravity, I call it the golden rule, which is just treating people like you want to be treated. If you do those two things and you do it consistently, you will be surprised how much force and power starts building up over time. And that's my really, really long answer. Thanks for listening.
Wow. Well, thanks for the TED Talk. I appreciate it. But no, seriously, I love that message. And I think that I wish more of us were cut from that piece of cloth that is the old doing to others as you would have others doing to you, that whole adage. But the other thing that I think is relevant is I'm sure you've experienced this in the sales world, and I'm sure you've run up against people who need a lesson in being able to just put the brakes on a little bit. Is they want to get to the sale, get to the influencer, and I hate that word influencer, get to the decision maker as quickly as they can. They don't want to plant the seeds. They don't want to reap what they sow. They just want to get there, get it done, and then live happily ever after. And I think it's partly due to the world we're in today, where we want that instant gratification of, if I'm hungry, I just pick up something on the way home and it's already prepared for me. I eat it. I want something. I want to watch something. I don't want to wait to watch it on TV. I just catch it on demand. So we're in this place of not wanting to build the relationship or set the table right. Are you finding that too in the influence space, that people want to sidestep almost wreck with the time space continuum?
Yes. And it's such an important thing to talk about, Carl. Yes, it's a huge problem in today's society for everything. Everybody wants an instant gratification. I want it now. And we're almost conditioned, because we can go to a drive-through and pick up some fast food and get it now. And the truth is, remember, like we talked about at the beginning, principles govern the consequences of our actions. So we can choose to do whatever the heck we want. But the problem is we don't choose the consequence. So the consequence is determined by the principle. So we talked about gravity, which is a scientific principle. We talked about the golden rule, which is the principle that allowed me to get into that high-level director's office in New York. Another principle that's as real as gravity, whether you believe it is or not, is I call it the law of the harvest, meaning we reap what we sow, and it does take time. And a lot of people on the internet, a lot of people right now are trying to sell this quick fix. Like, if you just do what I say, you'll instantaneously be wealthy and awesome overnight. And the truth is, that's not what governs your consequences. Those, frankly, most of the time are, I'll be blunt, lies. They really are. I mean, the law of the harvest says this: if I plant seeds in the spring, and if I make sure they're in the right amount of soil, and they have enough water, and they have enough sunlight, and they have enough warmth, and they have enough, and I weed them and take care of them, after many months, several months, I can harvest whatever it is I planted. And some people today say, well, I don't want to go plant seeds in the spring and take care of them and weed them. I just want the instant gratification now. And that's like as foolish as saying I'm going to plant, all the other farmers went and planted seeds in the April, and now it's September, October, they're trying to harvest. And I didn't. I just took it easy all summer. And now I want to plant seeds and just say, grow. And I talked to a bunch of farmers out in the Midwest, and they told me, I said, can you cheat the law of the harvest? And they laughed at me. They said, there's no way to cheat it. You've got to do it. So realize, as a podcaster, as someone who's trying to build influence, the consistent effort doing your podcast, the consistent effort of building trust, the consistent effort of aligning with principles on a daily, consistent basis over time can bring wonderful results. But if you're saying, oh, I have to just instantaneously have it right now, you're ignoring gravity. You're ignoring the law of the harvest.
Yeah, you definitely can't plant seeds and expect them to be, ready to harvest and be on the dinner table in less than 4 or 5 days. You do need the time, but and this is so true. And I'm glad you're mentioning that it's relevant in the podcasting space, because we see that a lot. We see the folks who want to be the Joe Rogan superstar, and with only 10 episodes under their belt and no previous experience or celebrity status. Let's face it, a guy like Joe Rogan has that behind him, or Oprah Winfrey, who has that. They've already built the relationship, the credibility, the status, whatever you want to call it, that allows them to get into something like a podcast and be an instant overnight success. It took them several years to become that instant success. But in this example, they've already done the work. So to that example, what do you share with people other than slow down? when they're wanting that instant gratification and you know that that's not the path, what advice or what do you say to them?
Most of these people who look like instant successes, really, if you look at it and you saw the real truth, they've been probably hustling for a decade and then they pop out of the ground. Everyone goes, oh, they were an instant success, but they were more like the bamboo tree. Have you heard about the bamboo thing? That the bamboo tree, like it has these roots that go down for a long time and you don't see much. And then all of a sudden you see this bamboo shoot come out. But what you didn't see was the roots growing and growing for a long time. And so a lot of times when we see people and say, oh, they were an instant success, we really don't see the whole story. And most of the time you've had people who are hustling and working hard and sacrificing and putting in the time, putting in the reps. And then later on, they have this success that looks instant, but you're exactly right. They still didn't cheat the law of the harvest. It may appear that way. And it may appear like a bamboo tree that pops out of the ground, but you don't see all the time that those roots were going down deep. So
wow.
Great question.
Wow. This is a phenomenal conversation. I think we could chat all day about this.
I love chatting with you, Carl. Goodness, you've got a great thing you're doing to help podcasters here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We probably shouldn't chat all day though, because then I'm doing a disservice to my audience. So I want to give you the opportunity to share something with the audience. What can you help with our listeners today that might help them be able to get into your head, learn from you? What are some things you can share with them?
I have just one thing to say that was brief. I would just say the key to success is not trying to find some newest silver bullet that's going to instantly take you there. The key to success, in my view, would be, number one, be humble enough to realize that you're not a principal. Number two, figure out what the principles are that govern what you want to go to. What are the principles that govern building a successful, influencing business in podcasting? What are the principles that govern relationships or whatever it is that you're trying to do? And then make your daily decisions, your little tiny daily decisions, the ones you don't think matter, align with them. Those little tiny daily decisions over time have a huge impact. So if you can remember to do those three things, you're not a principal yourself, figure out what they are, and then make your little daily decisions. Just focus on what you can do today to inch it forward. And after time, you'll have a huge harvest at some point. Is my belief.
EksAyn Anderson. Oh, we did forget to drive people to your newsletter, which is eksinfluence.com/subscribe, and a lot of juicy information in there, I'm sure.
We should hope so. The basics, but think about how to actually become increase your influence.
All right, perfect. eksinfluence.com/subscribe. We'll make sure that and all of your influence X is in the show notes. I'll give you one quick final thought if you've got one in you before we let you go.
I'll tell you this. My mom died when I was 8, and she said something before she died many times that hit me. She said, no matter the question, love is the answer. And I know that sounds a little oversimplified, but if you think about it, just loving that secretary is what got me into the door in New York. If you can truly choose to care about people, choose to care about people on your podcast, choose to care about those people you're trying to influence. That's the most powerful principle out there, is just to love people. Even if you don't feel like it, just choose. It's an action, not a feeling. Choose to care about people and watch things happen. Carl, you have a great show. You're a great host. Love being on the show with you. Thank you.
EksAyn, thank you for being the guest today.
My pleasure, and it's an honor to be asked to be on your show. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today. Special thanks to our producer and production lead, Dom Carrillo, our music guru, Nathan Simon, and the person who works the arms, all of our arms actually, my trusty assistant, Stephanie Gafour. If you like what you heard today, leave us a comment and a review, and be sure to share it with your friends. If you don't like what you heard, please share it with your enemies. Oh, and if you have a suggestion of someone who you think would make an amazing guest on the show, let us know about it. Drop us an email. Ask Carl at carlspeaks.ca. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. You'll find all those links in the show notes. And if you're ready to take the plunge and join the over 3 million people who have said yes to podcasting, let's have a conversation. We'll show you the simplest way to get into the podcasting space, because after all, we're podcast solutions made simple. We'll catch you next time.